On today's episode, we're going to talk about the undeniable link between public schooling and the ideological forefather of Hitler. We'll talk about one of the worst Americans that almost no one has heard of. Also, how to vet your information so you don't blindly buy into propaganda. And a simple 3-step process that helps you take simple skills and turn them into big money. My name is Henry Bingaman. This is Getting Out of the Machine. Today, I want to talk about something that has affected literally everybody in the United States in one way or another. And it's hard to rank all of our problems as a country, but I would put this one up there. So today's topic is education. Now, I think most people would recognize that quality education is incredibly important. One of the definitions of education, the one I like the most, is that it's information about or training in a particular field or subject. The more information and training you have, the better able you are to operate in the world as a person. The more money you can make, the clearer you'll think, the better outcomes you'll have in life. It's just all around an incredibly important thing. And if you like to nerd out like I do, education is actually fun. It boosts your self-esteem. You feel better. You feel more capable. But the way we do education in the United States and in most countries around the world is totally broken. Now, when I see a problem, I really like to get to the root causes. Where did this start? How did we get into the situation we're in? With education, we have to go all the way back to the early and mid 1800s. So let me tell you a story about one of the most influential Americans that you've probably never heard of. His name was Horus Mann. Now, if you look Horus Mann up in most history books and most education websites, you're going to get a fairly rosy picture of the guy. He was born into relative poverty. He was a basket maker growing up, and he eventually went on to become a notable abolitionist and a congressman. He's best known for advocating that every person in the United States, no matter your class, from the children of the elite to the children of the most destitute, every child has the right to an education. In fact, one of his most famous quotes is that a house without books is like a room without furniture. That's what everybody knows, and in general, he sounds like a good guy. He was born in the late 1700s, so being an abolitionist at the height of slavery in the United States, most people would consider that a good personality trait. So Horace was obviously very interested in educational systems. So in 1843, he caught wind of a really revolutionary new style of education that was happening in Prussia, which is modern-day Germany. So he went over there that year to observe this revolutionary schooling system. Now, to understand how the Prussians built their schooling system, you have to know a little bit about Prussian history. So in the early 1800s, the Prussian army had been just wiped out and humiliated by Napoleon. So as nation-states tend to do after a humiliating military defeat, the Prussian leaders started looking for somebody to blame. And you'll never guess who they ended up blaming. It wasn't Frederick Wilhelm III, the ruler of Prussia at the time, and it wasn't the military leaders that just got humiliated by Napoleon's generals on the battlefield. No, they ended up blaming their defeat on the soldiers because they were thinking for themselves too much instead of just following orders. So they went looking for a way to get soldiers to essentially blindly follow their orders. And the system that they ended up coming up with was heavily influenced by the philosopher Johann Fichte. Now, Fichte is also known as the father of German nationalism. He had this over-romanticized view of German history, so it was basically him that came up with the idea that Germans were a superior race. So he was also the ideological godfather of German anti-Semitism. In one of his essays, he wrote about giving Jews civic rights, and he concluded that the only way he could accept this would be, this is a quote, cut off all their heads in one night and set new ones on their shoulders, which should contain not a single Jewish idea. In case it's not obvious, this is where Hitler got a lot of his ideas. So in general, not a good guy. But for the purposes of this discussion, the idea that the Prussian government actually implemented at the time was Fichte's idea that individual rights had to be suppressed so the citizens could be tools to strengthen the goals of the state. There was no individual. All Germanic people should work for the glory of the fatherland. And one important step in accomplishing that was that children needed to be physically removed from their parents, especially religious parents. And they would be only indoctrinated with the ideas and skills that would bring about the supremacy of the fatherland. This is the origin of the schoolroom that most people picture today. Neat little rows of desks with all the students facing the same direction, sitting there quietly, listening to a teacher lecture, only talking when your hand is raised and you get called on. Basically suppressing every natural instinct a child has. So naturally, when Horus Mann visited Germany in 1843, as an advocate for abolition and human rights and really caring about children, he would have decried this as horrible, right? The system was just terrible. No, not a chance. He saw this as nothing but virtuous. He wanted and actually got this system, the Prussian system, implemented in as close a manner as he could back in the United States. He started in Massachusetts, but eventually it caught on and he took it national. This is the concept of forced government schooling. They call it free public education, but it's actually forced public education. It takes enormous expense and a lot of time to opt out of the public education system. And there's actually no opting out of getting the education in some form that the government wants you to get. That's why they have standardized tests. They have to make sure, quote unquote, that your kids aren't falling behind. But is it really falling behind, or is it just implementing the lessons that the government wants them to learn? Now, I know this can sound a little conspiratorial, but is it? Let me give you 2 quotes from Horus Mann that really kind of give you insight into how he thinks. The first quote is, "The state is the father of children." He basically believed that children belong to the state. The state's interest in children supersede parents' interests in their own children. Which, of course, is something we're kind of seeing again right now in our public school debates. Go online and it's not hard to find a teacher saying that parents shouldn't have a say in how their kids are educated, that the educators are the ones that know best, and parents should just leave them to do their own thing and not ask questions. Here's the second quote from Horus Mann that I think is really disturbing and gives you an insight into how he thinks. It goes, "We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause." So again, he's just laying it out. He doesn't care what the parents want. This is about the glory of the United States. Now, for me, just knowing that the public school system is a mirror image of a system that was founded to suppress individuality, with my values, that's just automatically disqualifying for the system. But a lot of people say, okay, that's where it started, but look where we got today. So, all right, let's look where we are today. The American school system is just embarrassing. And it's not a lack of funding. The United States spends over $750 billion a year on public schools. That's more money per student than any other country in the world. And we have far worse outcomes. There are a lot of school districts in the United States that graduate kids that can't even read. In the last episode, I talked about the quote from Stafford Beer, the British theorist and computer scientist, that the purpose of a system is what it does. Well, let's look at what the education system actually does. And I want to give you an example that's kind of close to home for me. So I lived in Philly for just over 10 years, and I paid an enormous amount of taxes, property taxes, that went to fund the Philadelphia Public School District. But just looking at a few of the districts in the area, the best rated school district in the Philadelphia suburbs is Radnor. So 88% of their students are proficient in reading, 78% are proficient in math, and 97% of their students end up graduating. Radnor spends about $24,000 a year per student. Now compare that to the worst rated school district, that's Philadelphia itself. Only 37% of their students are proficient in reading, and only 23% are proficient in math. Yet somehow, with those incredibly low numbers, 66% of these kids graduate. Which means half of the kids that graduate can't read, and way more than half can't do basic math. Yet, Philadelphia spends $27,483 per student per year. That's not because they're paying their teachers more. They pay their teachers actually $29,000 a year less than the Radnor School District, on average. So how is it that you could spend more money and get worse results? It's because the purpose of the public school system, for many, many people, it's not to give kids information and life skills that would make them successful. In fact, if you look at the outcomes, if you look at what the system actually produces, there's a few different things that stand out. First, it has to be said that it's a babysitting program. The way the economy works right now, most families struggle to make ends meet if they don't have two parents working. So a lot of these teachers are essentially overpaid babysitters. And that's not really a knock on the teachers. A lot of these kids come from troubled homes, they're difficult to deal with, they don't want to be there. It's impossible to educate somebody that doesn't want to learn. So I'm sure a lot of these teachers are doing their best. But given the weirdness and unnaturalness of the school system, it's just not ever going to be good enough. The other purpose of the public education system is, well, it's a jobs program. If you look at public schools as a group, it's one of the largest employers in the country. I think there's 3.5 million teachers in public schools. But all right, you could say those jobs are necessary. You know what's not necessary? The number of administrators in these schools. These administrators add almost no value to the education. They just think up harebrained schemes of disciplining kids and finding ways to get more funding secured for their schools. They all collect six-figure paychecks for doing essentially nothing. But there's also a third purpose of the public schooling system. They do manage to find the bright and talented kids, and they funnel them all towards a college education. Now, I know there are statistics that say college graduates do financially better in their life than non-college graduates. But one of the things that's never been clear to me is that college is actually the biggest factor there. So let's say you have a class of 100 people, and you take the 50 brightest, most intelligent, most ambitious of those kids, and you insist, basically from the time they hit middle school, that the best option they have is to graduate high school as near the top of their class as they can, and then go to college. Well, doesn't it make sense that it's because those are the smartest kids, that's why they actually end up doing better in life? I have a college degree. I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I got a degree in fiction writing. And I had a great time at Pitt. I really loved that school. And I met some great people. I still have a lot of college friends. But was my degree in fiction writing at all relevant to my success in the business world later? I mean, you could argue that I did learn to write and I did learn to take critiques of my writing, which was a big step. And you do grow a thick skin when you have a bunch of college kids tearing apart your writing and telling you all the ways that you've screwed up. But if it's a factor, it's a very small one. Now, the other thing we have to talk about with the public education system is that it's not a safe environment. Look, I went to a city public high school, and it wasn't safe at all. First of all, I got bullied and picked on by teachers and students. I had knives pulled on me in the school building, which is crazy because we still had to walk through metal detectors to get in. I got in fights outside. It was generally just not a overall safe place to be. And there's a really dark side to it too. There was an article published in CBS News a few years ago, and it was about we'll call it a certain type of abuse, the one that you really don't want to think about. And there was a Hofstra University researcher quoted in that study, Carol Shakeshaft. She found the physical abuse of children in schools is likely more than 100 times greater than the abuse by priests. Our own government looked into this problem in California's public school system, and they believed that 422,000 public school students would be the victim of this type of abuse before graduation. And a 2002 Department of Education report found that anywhere between 6% to 10% of all students in public schools would be the victims of abuse before graduation. Look, that's up to 10%, 1 in 10 kids, suffering actual traumatic abuse in public schools. Now, the counter argument to that is most of this type of abuse happens at the hands of a family member, and it's very often uncovered by teachers in a public school. But for the actual good parents out there that love their kids and would murder anybody they found doing this, it's not comforting to know that you're putting your kids in a situation where there's a 6% to 10% chance that something horrific will happen to them. And again, this is an ongoing problem. Nobody talks about it. Now, thank God I wasn't one of those statistics, but in all my years in the public school system, I can only think of 3 or 4 teachers that actually had a lasting, real positive impact on my life and my educational trajectory. On the flip side of that, I can also think of at least 3 teachers who were verbally abusive to me. I had one teacher in 8th grade English who, I remember this so clearly, we were doing a silent reading assignment while he was grading our essays, and he literally called my name out. He said, "Bingaman." And then he started reading out all the spelling errors I had in this 2-page essay, which was like 5. I've never been good at spelling. I don't care about spelling. He clearly knew the words, but he literally read out loud the words and how I spelled them in front of a class of like 20 students. I don't know how you call embarrassing a student in front of their peers teaching. It's just not. So that's 3 good teachers. And look, they were really good. Mrs. King, Mrs. Corenda, Mrs. Hatt. They were all really positive influences in my life. But that's out of, in all the years of schooling, maybe 50, 60 teachers that I had? And all of those 50, 60 teachers spent, hundreds of hours with me every year? 3 were good, 3 were bad. The other 40 or 50-something were babysitters with a lesson plan. Now, I'm sure they were really good teachers for some other students, just not me. But for any individual student, The odds of having a really good teacher in any one class are terrible. You're just as likely to have a bully for a teacher as you are to have somebody who really is going to make a positive impact in your life. Now, I know this isn't universally true. I know there are a lot of people that really enjoyed their high school and middle school and elementary school experiences, and especially some of my friends that grew up in the suburbs, they have nothing but good things to say about their teachers. But there are millions and millions of kids like me that grew up in city schools that just had a terrible experience. And that's not really an accident. The city schools generally are better funded than the suburban schools. They're just more corrupt. So let me just sum up the public school system as a whole. It's forced government schooling where at least some of the teachers are abusive, where as many as 1 in 10 students will suffer the worst kind of physical abuse that an adult can do to a child. And in some school districts, at least half of the students will graduate without being fully competent in reading and math, the 2 most important skills you need to learn anything else in your life. So now, if you judge a system by what it does, not what it claims to do, then, again, in my view, there are 3 purposes of these government schools. The first is the jobs program aspect. Government schools employ millions of people, millions of teachers, and at least hundreds of thousands of overpaid and useless administrators. And this is all at taxpayer expense. The second purpose of these schools is as a government-funded daycare center. There's a reason this is actually needed. It has to do with how our economy works. Even most 2-parent households need 2 full-time workers to pay the bills. And even when they could be okay on one income, culturally, it's just a lot more common for both parents to want to work, to want to advance their careers. And since starting in 1st grade, you can get tax-funded childcare from the government for a majority of the day, in most people's calculus, it's going to make a lot of sense to send your kid to these public schools. The third purpose of a government school is to identify the quote-unquote smart kids and systematically funnel them towards the university system. Now, there are a variety of reasons I think this is a horrible idea. First, it makes no sense to me that high school guidance counselors, people who are supposed to help kids set up their life for success, encourage 17 and 18-year-olds to take on tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt to get a degree in political science or history or even English literature. What they should actually be doing for any kid who wants to think about one of those majors is sit down with that kid with a calculator and do the math. All right, little Johnny, you want to borrow $100,000 to get a degree in English literature. Now, there aren't a ton of jobs out there for lit majors, but you're intelligent, so you're probably going to find something you hate doing in corporate America, making $50,000 a year to start. Now, you'll have to take that job because with this loan hanging over your head, you're going to need to start paying somewhere around $500 to $600 a month on that loan. So you're not going to be able to sit around reading books or wasting your time trying to become the next great American novelist. Oh, and also if something goes terrible in your life and you have to declare bankruptcy, this debt will never be discharged, so you're paying it no matter what. Now, with the interest rate on your loan, you're going to be making just interest payments, essentially, for probably the first 10 or 15 years of your working life. So by the time you really start paying down your principal, you'll be about 30, 35, maybe 40. Now, that's a little late in life, but it's right around the time you might really want to start a family or buy a house. Unfortunately, you spent the past 10 or 15 years paying $100,000 of interest on your school loan, of which you have $100,000 left because all you've done is pay interest. So you won't actually have the money to do that, unless you really want to become a slave and move up the ranks of your corporate job. That way you can get into a position that almost compensates you reasonably for the soul-sucking work that you hate doing, but need to do for the money. Also, almost nothing you learn in college will be applicable in your life or especially in this soul-sucking corporate job. Everything you're going to learn in college, you could have learned for free online. Of course, if you learn everything online, you won't have a diploma as a credential. And that credential is really important to all the corporations that you'll probably hate working for your first job. Because after your first job, potential employers really only care about your work experience. Now, imagine guidance counselors having that conversation all over the country with millions of kids who are thinking about taking on these ridiculous student loans. And this is a much more realistic conversation than kids ever hear. So if that was the conversation, that much more realistic take, how many kids would go to college? Hopefully the people that would become doctors and engineers would still go to some of the elite schools. And hopefully those schools will teach them actual hard skills instead of some of the for lack of a better word, woke nonsense that they're getting today. So, if education is one of the most important things in society, and the public education system is hopelessly broken, what are you supposed to do exactly? Well, I have two answers. One is for the kids, and one is for you as an adult at really any stage of your life. So first, if you have kids, a lot of people are going to be mad at me for this, but given that my last episode was titled Democracy Can't Save You, it probably won't be that surprising. Here's the fact: you're not going to fix the school system. There is no amount of increased budget or school reform or fixing the teachers' unions that's going to make public schooling work for everyone. It's a hopeless system. It's neglected the people who it claims to help the most, and it's trained generation after generation of the smartest Americans to be subservient stooges to the state. And if I wasn't broadcasting this to the world, I'd tell you how bad I really think it is. So if you have kids, my number one suggestion is to homeschool. It's actually more practical than you think, and there are great home-based video courses and curriculums that are out there that they don't cost an arm and a leg, and they do most of the hard work for you. Look into the Ron Paul curriculum as a place to start. That kind of ideologically aligns with me, but do your own research. There's a lot of stuff out there. But if homeschooling's just not going to work, which, look, that may be true in your situation, but please just take a few hours and search the internet for how homeschooling really works before you definitely decide that it's not for you. But anyway, if it's not going to work, you're still the parent of your kids. No matter what Horus Mann says about state being the father of children, and no matter what millions of public school teachers think, the state is not the father of your children. There are better and worse teachers and better and worse schools, but ultimately your child is your responsibility. So here's a suggestion. Try to make it a game with your kids. Sit down with them every night, or a few times a week at least, and play behind enemy lines. And you go, all right, kiddo, you spent the day in the Matrix. So a lot of the things they taught you are true, but they most likely snuck some propaganda and some lies in there too. So let's talk about what they said and see if we can figure out what's true and what's not true together. So look, at the end of the day, the true reason why some school districts have great graduation stats and some have terrible ones really comes down to how involved the parents are in their kids' education. That's why that saying in the airplanes is true. You put your own oxygen mask on before helping other people. You have to know what you're doing before you can help your kids. So one of the most important things you can do is question everything. Now, I actually don't agree with the people who say that everything you learn in public schools and everything you see from the corporate or mainstream press is a lie. That kind of thinking just leads people to believe the opposite, or what they perceive as the opposite of everything they hear. And the corporate press will still occasionally say, the sky is blue and the grass is green. So believing the opposite is where people go wrong, and people get sucked into the QAnon type places. Now, I'm going to do an episode on the media soon, because it really is, outside of the university system, one of the most despicable places in America, one of the most detrimental forces acting against our society. But for now, it's a much more reasonable assumption that what the media is saying in one way or another isn't true or false. It just serves what they perceive as their own interests. So this can be as duplicitous as there were WMDs in Iraq, so we need to start a war and kill hundreds of thousands of their people, mostly innocent farmers, and thousands of our own soldiers. Or it could be something true and devastating to certain people, like, hey, we have a Harvey Weinstein problem in Hollywood. So the media will use the truth when they can, but when it doesn't serve their interests, they'll find ways to dance around it. So the point is, you can't make an instant true or false assumption based on any one single news report or series of reports. This has been true for well over a century. It's just a fact that journalists lied us into the Spanish-American War, World War I, probably World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. They tried it with Syria and it didn't work, and they're currently trying it with a Ukraine-Russia situation. It's just not working as well because people have access to so much more information. So look, if you can't trust the media, or by extension the experts that they choose to put on, who can you trust? How can you actually figure out what's true? Well, it's not actually as hard as you think. There's a lot of independent media that exists today that is willing to tell the truth. I'm sure you can think of half a dozen names off the top of your head. of people that are at least out there trying to be honest. The point is, you have to start searching for a lot of articles on the topics that you're interested in. You can't trust one single source. And you can't spend too much time looking at right-wing or left-wing media. You have to pop your own little media bubble. You can't trust anyone uncritically. But you have to learn to recognize the people who are trying to tell the truth and the people who are spinning the facts for their own purposes. One of the most effective things you can do is to carefully read the hit pieces and watch the critical YouTube videos that are attacking the people who you instinctively trust. It really gives you a good view into who's being honest and who isn't. If you carefully read an article by a journalist, then you read criticism of that piece, it's actually pretty easy to see if that criticism is in good faith or not. Illegitimate criticism almost always takes one or two quotes from an article or from a video or whatever format. They ascribe the meaning that they want to it that they can defeat, and then they attack it viciously. Usually, if you see somebody attacking someone's motives, it's at least an indicator that this might be a bad faith critique. Legitimate criticism usually says, all right, here's how I understand the piece. They summarize it as best they can, and then they take issue with certain points, or even if they take issue with the entire premises, they could still be doing it in good faith, as long as they at least attempt to represent the author's actual beliefs and points. And people that attack your points are actually helping you. They're giving you a chance to make your case stronger, or they're giving you a chance to change your mind if they're actually right. It doesn't actually matter what your politics are. If you start by abandoning your ideological beliefs and you analyze the arguments people are actually making, it won't take you long to figure out who's being honest and who's playing their political agenda. There are people on all sides playing their political agenda. The left, the right, the libertarians, the Green Party, the socialists, everybody has a political agenda. There's no reason to trust that any of them are being honest until you've really examined their points, examined how they critique other people, and examined the critiques on them. And even then, you can't let the lens of, well, they may be wrong on this one point go. You just have to keep an open mind. The thing that drives me crazy is the trust the experts people, because all they're doing is really accepting one ideological point. They're saying that these experts that have been approved for us by the media are the only experts and there's no opinion outside of what they say. Anybody that says that, you can dismiss immediately. They're not being honest. They're not playing an intellectual game. They're playing a credentialism game and a gotcha game. There's really no point in arguing with them after they reveal that bias. So the last point I want to talk about, and we have to go back to that original definition of education: information about or training in a particular field or subject. I spent a couple minutes talking about figuring out who to trust in the media because the news sources you trust in large part shape how you view the world, and in some ways what you think is possible for you to accomplish it all. For example, if you uncritically accept the view that the only way to get rich is to be a bad person and rip people off, well, you're never going to be able to make a lot of money. Your brain won't let you because nobody wants to be a bad person who's ripping people off. But the truth is, there are a ton of ways to make money online, especially now with all the possibilities the internet has opened up. You just have to learn how to get a real education by the definition I just gave you. So, since you're here listening to me, I'm going to give you my recommendation for how to educate yourself and turn that education into a lot of money. Now, this is going to sound far too simple, but I promise you it really isn't complicated. It's 3 steps. Step 1, choose a skill that you can develop and that you actually enjoy doing. For me, this was writing. Now, I almost gave up on writing when I was in 8th grade and that teacher mocked me for my spelling in front of the whole class. But luckily, I actually do have a talent for it, and my high school English teachers were very encouraging. But people have all kinds of different talents. Building things or woodworking, painting, music, cooking, gardening, programming, graphic design. There's any number of things. And people usually discover these talents because either it's something they can spend hours doing or because other people tell them they're good at it. And also, when you learn something new in something that you're talented in, even if it's a small thing, it feels really satisfying. All right, so step 1 is get the talent. Step 2 is the hard one. You have to spend a few years getting really, really good at it. I've been writing since I was a kid, but that was more as a hobby. When I was in college, I stumbled across a training program that claimed you could make a 6-figure income writing from anywhere in the world. Honestly, I kind of laughed off that concept at first, But the idea got stuck in my head. So when I had my first job, I was making about $20,000 a year. And I thought, well, all right, maybe I can supplement my income a little with writing. Then the first time I got paid for writing, I was hooked. I spent the next couple years, 12 to 14 hours a day, learning everything I could about writing sales messages, how to get clients, how to sell more, how to get paid more, how to do the entire marketing campaigns. And within about a year, I had enough experience and expertise to make a living. Not a great living, but it was a living. Within 3 years, though, I was making 6 figures in income. And within 10 years, I was one of the best in the world at copywriting. Now, you don't have to get as obsessed as I did with copywriting. If you're young, I do highly recommend getting obsessed. It gives you a huge advantage in life. The advantage of being young is that you have plenty of time. Just give up Netflix and some of your nights out at the bar. You'll reap the benefits for the rest of your life. If you're older, the advantage that you have is that you've probably already developed some skills. So you can just hone them. It won't take as long. The other thing about being a little older is you have more experience, so people will take you more seriously. But you have to choose a skill and really lean into it. Now here's what's going to happen. It's going to happen slowly and painfully with plenty of frustrations, but it's going to happen. You're going to start getting better and better at that skill. Then people are going to recognize that you have that skill. And as soon as people start recognizing that you have a skill, you're going to find people that are willing to pay you for it. They may try to hire you outright, and that's fine if you want to go that route. But you could also go online and form a simple LLC, a limited liability company, and start selling whatever product or service your skill produces. So if it's a product, like if you're an artist, your paintings, or if you're a baker, your food, or if you're a musician, the music you wrote, you just sell that product online. You're going to have to learn a new skill set for selling online, but it's doable. If it's a service that you're selling, something like writing or graphic design or programming, I highly recommend you just become a contractor. What that means is you do work for clients on a project-by-project or contract-by-contract basis. Now, there are a ton of advantages to selling your skills as a contractor as opposed to an employee. First, you can oftentimes, especially when you're more well-known, get a lot more money for work that you would have done as an employee anyway. Second, you control your time. You get to work when you decide, as long as you reach whatever deadline you agreed on with the client. Third, you can spread out the risk of being out of work. If you're an employee, you basically are like a contractor, but with just one client. So if you get fired as an employee, you're in a scramble to replace that income. As a contractor, you're usually expected to have a handful of clients you work with at any given time. So if one client decides not to work with you anymore, for whatever reason, you're only losing a portion of your income. Then there's a bunch of other benefits, especially on taxes and the ability to diversify what kinds of work you do and what projects you take on, so you're not getting bored like most employees do with their job. Of course, the downside there is it's harder to get started, and you have to learn how to write up contracts, although most people just go online. There's templates you can find and modify for your own purposes. But if you have a skill and you become really good at it, this is the way to go. Now, all right, let's say you did steps 1 and 2. You found a talent and you got good at it. Here's step 3, and this is where the real money comes in for almost any skill or talent. You can teach other people what you know. This is why I'm focusing so much on education. Everyone knows that education and learning useful skills and knowledge is incredibly valuable, which is why people are willing to pay a lot of money to learn things. This is another one of the tragedies of our current education system. Some of the best, most brilliant teachers in the world, teachers who are really helping people, are stuck in a school or university. They're getting paid peanuts when they could be making serious money and changing thousands of lives by selling their teaching online. Look, there are people teaching everything from woodworking to creative writing to how to bake healthy meals. And if they're really good, they're making hundreds of thousands or in some cases millions of dollars a year. And they're in total control of their own destinies. They don't have a boss. They don't have to deal with the bureaucracy that comes with corporations. If you're an expert in almost anything, and you can get recognized as one, you can either seriously supplement your income, or you can totally replace it by teaching what you know. Now, this is still hard work, and you have to learn some new skills, but it's doable, and it's worth doing. People will love you for it. Look, I spend thousands of dollars on books and courses every year. I listen to a couple dozen podcasts that advertisers spend thousands to advertise on so that the expert can give it to all of us for free. And this is why I get so worked up about our current educational system. Because what it promotes is miseducation. Or let's call it mal-education, when instead we could all have better lives if we just let our own interests guide our education. All right, that's all I have for you this week. If you have any thoughts or feedback, you can find me on Twitter at Henry Bing and on Instagram at HenryIRL. All right, I'll see you back here next week.